Hello everyone, and you're very welcome to today's webinar for the Digital T-Levels and preparing you for your second year of delivery with the Occupational Specialisms. The plan for today is just to begin with some quick introductions, have a brief overview of Year 2, then we're going to look in more detail at the performance outcomes, mapping the specification content, and some teaching and learning strategies. We'll finish with the resources and support available and address any questions that you may have. However, please do ask questions throughout this webinar, as we will be addressing them as we go. And this session is also being recorded, and you can access the slides being used from the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. But first, I would just like to begin with a little poll, just to gauge what your current confidence is with the Digital T-Levels and the delivery of the Occupational Specialism. So just 1 to 10, where would you put your current confidence? So you should see that poll on your screen now. So 1 being little to no confidence and 10 being extremely confident. All the votes in now. Just close off that poll. And you can see the results on screen there. So not too many people above 5 to 6. Majority in the lower end. Hopefully today's webinar will give you a little bit more confidence going forward. So first then, these few quick introductions. So my name is David Kiernan, and I work in the provider development team at NCFE. And I support providers with the delivery of our qualifications, the structure, the assessments, and anything related to teaching and learning. My direct email is Sean, but if I'm unavailable, then do please use our general provider development email address. I'm also joined today by David Seddon, so I'll now hand over to him to introduce himself.
Hi, welcome to the session. Just a little bit about me and my background. I've been with NCFE now for around 12 months. Prior to this, I worked in a large FE college for just over 20 years. Delivering and managing computer science programs, and that was across both further and higher education, and also working on apprenticeships and degree apprenticeships. I've been involved with T-Levels since they first started development, and the college I worked at was one of the first colleges to pilot the qualifications. So with that in mind, for me, I think that high quality technical qualifications are really essential now in supporting the digital sector. I think they'll help to build the next generation of competent and technical professionals, and also meeting industry needs, because we need to fill these skill shortages that we're seeing within the digital professions.
Thanks very much for that. Yeah, excellent point actually as well, skills shortage. So thank you very much again. I'm just going to begin with having an overview of the Year 2, just including the assessments as well. But first, and especially as quite a few of you were low in confidence there at the start, or in the middling and low range, I would just like to know, is there anything in particular about Year 2 that's on your mind? Any particular questions, anything that you may want to know more about? Anything along those lines whatsoever, any concerns, etc. So if you could either scan that QR code with your smart device, or you can click on the link I've just put into the chat, or if you go to slido.com and enter that code, we'll take you to this word cloud, and just like to get your ideas and collect them and see what your thoughts are. Okay, we've got quite a few results in there. So we can see certainly assessments is one of the key things, and planning the assessments, assessment structure, so we can see quite a bit along those. Data tools that need to be used. We're finding quite a few different, managing multiple occupational specialisms. Planning the assessment, so the depth of content as well. Planning the specification between 2 members of staff. Okay, so we've got quite a few different things, but we have assessments coming out quite strongly on there clearly. Right then, so what I'm going to do, just to begin with, is just have a reminder, first of all, of what the core content looked like. which the majority of providers, and I imagine the majority of you here have probably already delivered and was your year one focus. So we do have the 12 core knowledge units, and we have those additional 3 units for those doing digital support services. And then there are the core skills, which students would need to be able to demonstrate. And this core content helps to lay that foundation that the occupational specialism content is built upon. And these are the occupational specialisms that are currently available. So we have digital infrastructure, network cabling, and digital support. They are available to those who are doing the digital support services pathway. And the other occupational specialism is data technician, and that's available from the digital business services pathway. Now, each occupational specialism has got performance outcomes, each of which indicates the knowledge and skills required to enable students to achieve threshold competency in their chosen occupational specialism. So the 3 specialisms available from digital support services, they all have 3 performance outcomes. While as we can see with the data technician for digital business services, it has got 6 performance outcomes. Now, within the specification as well, there is teaching content for each of these performance outcomes. And this is what that sort of content looks like and is laid out as. So for each performance outcomes, you'll find that there's some knowledge content. And some of this content is going to build upon that content that you already delivered in year 1. And similar to year 1, there is knowledge content and there is also skills content. So there is skills content for each of the performance outcomes as well. And if you look to the bottom right of what's being shown on screen now of the content, you'll see it also says GMC 10. So that's being referenced there. And what this is referring to, as many of you may already be aware of, is the general competencies. So these form part of all T levels. And this lists the English, maths, and digital skills competencies that students are also going to be taught. Now, these have already been embedded within the specification. As you can see, they are indicated on the skills there. But you may find it useful to try and develop these further with your students where you can. Another useful section of the specification to be aware of, as this also was mentioned in the word cloud, I believe, resources, is this section here, section 6, additional information. We actually have a section in there regarding the resource requirements. So this section of the specification lists the resources you'll need to deliver the occupational specialism. If you haven't done so already, it definitely would be useful to cross-reference this list with your own resources. Now, assessments, that was one of the big things that people were interested in. And the way they're assessed, the occupational specialisms, is through a series of synoptic assignments. And these have been designed to be as occupationally realistic as possible, and they're externally set by NCFE. There are specific conditions that the task must be undertaken, and they'll be found in the provider guide. Some of them might be supervised sessions, some may require audio or video recordings, etc. Now, where the core assessments are graded from A star to E, these assignments are graded distinction to ungraded. And the retake rules for the synoptic assignments is the same as those for the core assessments. So there's an unlimited number of retakes, although that might be difficult, of course, to schedule within 2 years. That would have to require students coming back. But any retakes, they must be completed within 2 years after completion. And if students do need to do any retakes, it would be of all the assignments. So it's not just possible to choose a single assignment or task to retake. Now, there is a single assignment for the data technician occupational specialism. That's part of the digital business services. And this assignment is broken up into 4 tasks, but each task can contain subtasks such as task 1A, task 1B, etc. So for the first task, students will research and write a proposal based on the brief. For example, it could be regarding the smart home device market, considering the demographics of those users, how the devices are used, what's the forecast for these smart home devices, etc. and making sure they use valid sources for their research. And they'll also have to analyze data sets provided by NCFE, consider their appropriateness, and they'll also have to consider the impact of certain laws, policies, and/or regulations in relation to this data, such as if any data is impacted by GDPR or the Data Protection Act 2018, etc. For task 2, students will be given further data, and they'll need to process it, cleanse, validate, etc. this data, and they'll also need to perform some kind of analysis too. The students will also need to merge data sets together and log their progress and decision making throughout that task. For task 3, students will identify trends and patterns in the data using statistical tests and keep a log containing the decisions they've made about the selected data to represent their insights and how it relates to the client's brief. Our sample assessment includes aspects like identifying the popularity of different home smart devices by age, creating a dashboard with graphs, tables, filters, etc. So just to give you a sense of the type of evidence. And then we have the final task, task 4, where students are to create a presentation, drawing conclusions, showcasing the results, etc. They'll also explain and justify any key insights they've identified, any trends or interesting patterns that appeared. So the following now are all for the digital support services T level, beginning with the digital infrastructure, occupational specialism. So this one has got 3 assignments, but the assignments, they can be subdivided again into little separate tasks. Assignment 1 is about planning and designing, such as a new building needing required hardware that will provide a very robust network. So evidence can include a project plan, flow or Gantt charts, consider legal or regulatory requirements, creating diagrams, technical proposals for the server's roles, storage, and operating systems, etc. Assignment 2 is about developing a test system for the reason given in the brief. For example, there's a planned upgrade on the backend servers, and a small test system needs to be developed, and that can be used to test compatibility with existing backend systems, explore features for the latest server operation system, etc. And this will also include practical tasks as well, such as cable creation and the installation and configuration of a new test system that's going to be used to simulate this new network. And then the final assignment is all about risk assessment and mitigating these risks. So these tasks can include aspects like a risk assessment document, security policy documents, business continuity or recovery documents, system reconfiguration screenshots, etc. For the digital support occupational specialism, we also have 3 assignments, which again can be subdivided into tasks. For our first assignment, it's about the preparation involved in configuring a network and then installing and configuring that network. For our second assignment, it's about dealing with job requests, including prioritizing jobs and justifying those choices and taking appropriate action. Students will also create like instructional documents for users. So documents relating to carrying out a display screen equipment workstation assessment, as an example. Then we have our final assignment, which is about the monitoring, maintenance, and demonstrating that continuous improvement of a network, such as the creation of an infrastructure status log. Students will also need to deploy an image remotely, so evidence can include annotated screenshots or photographs, depending on whether it's a virtual machine or a physical machine, and documented notes showing the creation and deployment of an image. And then we also have network cabling, which also has 3 assignments, which again can be subdivided. Assignment 1 is designing a new network and network diagram that meets the requirements of the brief. This can include the production of a network design specification, diagram showing the physical layout of the proposed installation and the rationale behind that, screenshots of a logical network diagram demonstrating how it's configured, description of how all the components on the network are going to work together. And assignment 2 is about installing and testing the cabling system. So students might have to create working cables and install hardware to a standard that will ensure a safe and working environment for the end users, come up with a test plan and testing the cables, such as data transmission capability. And we have our third assignment then, which is about risk assessment and troubleshooting, such as the testing the cables to find and fix faults, describe how to approach troubleshooting for a proposed installation, and carrying out a risk assessment of a network. Now, we do have sample assignment briefs on QualHub for all of these, as well as exemplification materials showing pass and distinction standards of work. We will also be delivering some webinars specific to the occupational specialism assignments later on in the year. So I'm going to be handing over to David Seddon shortly, who's going to go through the performance outcomes. But first, I just want to have a quick check to see if any questions have come in first. No questions currently. As I said, do make sure any questions you have, pop them into that question box. We will be addressing them as we go. So David, I shall hand over to you now.
Thanks, David. Right, as you're aware, I mean, the root course delivered in year one, and there's 12 topics, which has briefly been mentioned. And regardless of which of the T levels you're delivering, it's the same core. The only difference being, as we just mentioned, in year one of the digital support services, the learner also completes the 3 pathway core outcomes, which are assessed as part of year one second exam. And those are the core elements that can be seen at the top of the table on the screen. In year two, both the digital business services and the digital support services are broken down into performance outcomes, and we're just going to be looking at them over the next few slides. At a glance, though, you'll notice that performance outcome 1 and performance outcome 3 for the digital support services are virtually the same, regardless of the specialism. That doesn't mean the content's the same, but as you can imagine, there's going to be a lot of similarities, and that will provide great opportunities to combine groups. I think that was one of the things that came up in the word group about the best way for working with mixed groups. So if you're offering more than one specialism, it means that really it gives you the opportunity to focus on that and then contextualize it towards the different job roles. And later on in a couple of slides, we'll just look at how we might work in that in a bit more detail. So as can be seen, there's 3 specialisms in the digital support services, the infrastructure, cabling and support, opposed to just the one pathway, which is on the digital business services, which is the data technician. For performance outcomes, one of the main focuses applying procedures and exploring security measures within an organisation and the measures we take to protect the data. So if you're looking across multiple specialisms, you'll see that we use the same kind of techniques regardless, you know, things like preventative, detective, corrective, deterrent control measures. So as you progress through that performance outcome 1, you'll see there's a lot of things, that's the same with the disaster recovery plans, things that are common across them all. And again, you know, that what you're delivering won't differ, but depending on the specialism, there might be slight tweaks. If you was talking about disaster recovery plans, the process of building a disaster recovery plan will be the same regardless of the specialism, but the risks that they've got in the plan might be different. And it's the same when we're looking at things like threats, vulnerabilities and mitigation. As you know, there's always going to be a lot of the same ones regardless of the specialism, but you'll find that there's different risks. So for a network cabler, it'll have different risks than if somebody was working in digital support. So throughout the outcome, there's a lot of commonality, but it's just making sure you need to be aware of where you need to differentiate if you're grouping students together on specialisms. And it's mainly about differentiating between job roles and how it works on that side. And by sitting down and kind of mapping these out, you'll see exactly where you can combine the groups. And I know I've already spoke to a couple of colleges that have already started to look at mapping these all across and finding out the best way of being able to group students together based on specialisms and that. And as you can see on the screen, the example we've included there, you'll notice that for digital infrastructure, it's K 1.15, but the other two specialisms, it's K 1.14. And this shows that there is slight differences where additional knowledge might have been added or something's removed from a specialism. And in the example we've got here, you can see the outcomes are exactly the same. But the thing is, it's then contextualized towards a job role. So infrastructure might be looking at threats to a company or technology or processes, whereas a cabler might be considering risks such as working at a height or wall ports or wiring. And digital support will be looking at risks relating to supporting users or equipment and user access. So the process is the same, but why we're doing it slightly different. For performance outcomes, the emphasis is for performance outcome 3. Sorry, the emphasis is sources of knowledge, reliability, bias, critical thinking, and communication. And as you can imagine, again, regardless of which specialism, there's going to be a lot of similarity, just mainly a bit of contextualization. For example, in the one we've got on the screen, K3.2. when we're exploring factors of reliability and validity, you'll be looking at things like industry-based certification. And as you'll probably be aware, it'll vary depending on the job role that somebody's going to be doing. Yeah, it might be beneficial if learners get to see other industry certs. They vary between different job roles. So if you are working with mixed specialisms, combining groups together like that would kind of open it up to that wider opportunity and see what kind of certifications would be required if you was moving between roles. For example, the one we've got there, a network cabler might at some point need to undertake Cisco certification, but they don't necessarily need it at this stage. So there is slight changes that way. The point here, it shouldn't need to increase any of your teaching time. So even if you are combining groups, it'd be easy to cover the core concepts with the whole combined group and then break into smaller groups based on specialisms for research-based activities. And we'll look at some of them later, just around the specialisms. PO2, performance outcome 2, is the key performance outcome, and this is where there's no mapping options at all in this, and this is the key performance outcome where the knowledge and the skills is purely dependent just upon the specialism. Depending on what placements you've done, you might have found placements or managed to secure placements relevant to the specialism, and you might be able to then get your students to demonstrate how they're meeting the knowledge and skills in this outcome, how they're doing it in the workplace. Or if you placed your students in year 1, you'll draw on their experience to announce sessions. Maybe get students who's done the placements to create a presentation, maybe a day in the life of, and get the learners to look at mapping the knowledge and the skills and the behaviours in the specifications to what they're doing in the workplace to show how it's being put into practice. For learners studying the digital business service route, they complete 6 performance outcomes in year 2. And as you can see from the list on the screen, these are broken down into quite a logical range of topics. So first we start off with sourcing information, then joining, blending, cleansing data. Next, looking at structured and unstructured data and how we might use this to improve business performance. This outcome also touched on things like statistical modelling, patterns, trends. Then we've got data visualization, stakeholders, and communicating data to audiences. As would be expected, there's legislation in there with a clear focus on DPA, GDPR, and codes of practice, and that should build nicely on from the legislation that they looked at in the core. And then finally, they look at the application of reliable sources of knowledge, knowing how to avoid bias and check validity. So it's kind of broken up in that logical way that follows on step by step. But having said that, it's still worth going through and looking at the mapping across the performance outcomes, because you might find that, and again, I think somebody mentioned it before in that word cloud, you know, looking at working with certain members of staff and how you'd divide up the teaching on the programme. If you've got teaching staff who are more specialised in certain elements of data analytics or legislation, they might be better suited to working across all the performance outcomes. For example, if we just think about SQL, it appears in K 1.11, K 2.3, and I think it's S 2.9. So if you're delivering a session on this, it's important that you make sure that you've looked at what's involved in all them three, so that the session maps to all three of the knowledge and skills as you're delivering it. So it is looking at overall how we take data, how we structure it, look at applying it, working with visualization, working across, thinking of how we can work across the performance outcomes, and delivering it more holistically rather than approaching everything as individual performance outcomes or that unitized approach. And as some of you may have noticed, performance outcome 6 is worded exactly the same as performance outcome 3 on digital support services. So if you're delivering both, there is chance for combining students for that part. Yeah, there is some similarities here, but there is a few extras in the digital business services, because at this point as well, the students have to consider how they're presenting information. So it's not just about finding the information, is it reliable, but are they presenting valid, reliable, and data that's not biased. So over the next session, we're going to explore about content and how it could be mapped and combined depending on needs. But first of all, I'll just hand it back to David for a minute just to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, thanks, David. Just having a look now. No questions currently, so looks like that's all good. Remember, everyone, do please put those questions in. Want to make sure that anything that you're curious about, we do get addressed. Now, just before David gets on to talking about mapping the content, I'd like to know actually which occupational specialism you're delivering. And actually, if you are delivering multiple ones. So if you are delivering multiple ones, if you tick more than one box, definitely tick the last box on this poll as well. So I'm going to put this on the screen now. So hopefully you can all see that. Just tick whichever ones are relevant to you. Maybe having issues. I'll tell you what, I will close it off there. So you can see 30% data technician, 50% digital support, and 40% digital infrastructure. So we do have a few people who are actually delivering multiple occupational specialisms as well. That's interesting. Thank you very much for sharing that. I'm going to hand back over to David now.
Thanks, David. Yeah, in this session, it's really looking at kind of mapping those outcomes through and thinking where they start to combine together, and if we can map across different specialisms, that type of thing. So as we've already mentioned about the similarities between the different performance outcomes across all the specialisms, we can start to break that down a bit further. You know, if we go inside all the performance outcomes themselves and start to look at where the similarities lie, you'll notice that some of the certain knowledge and their exact matches. Again, you can see on the example we've got on screen, the K is different. So one of them's K 1.12 and the other's K 0.11. So where it's placed as a knowledge is different, but what it's actually asking is exactly the same. So by doing this exact matching, it means that if you're grouping students together, you know that if you're delivering something, it's relevant to all the students as you're working through it. So in the case here, if you was looking at the process of risk management, the process itself is going to be exactly the same regardless of the specialism they're on. The difference might be how you deliver it, because you know, the risk behind it might be different, but the reason or the process would be the same. And then if we look at some of the other outcomes, they might be virtually the same, but have slight differences in the knowledge that's gained. For example, if we look at K 1.14 across two different specialisms, you'll notice the key difference. One of them clearly identifies a need to understand the role of the business control techniques, whereas the other specialism just requires learners to know about the different types. And maybe this is something that's not important if you're just delivering one specialism, but if you're combining groups together, it's important that you don't miss something because one of the outcomes that's been picked up has been taken from one specialism and not the other. So it's just making sure that you don't miss a key requirement of knowledge or skills that are required for one of the specialisms. And then we might find outcomes that are exactly the same, but need approaching specifically for that specialism. For example, when we're explaining risk responses with learners, you'd obviously need to explore risks so the learners can see what a low impact, high probability risk is. And that means contextualization really is key to the specialism here. And if you're working with mixed groups, then use the session to kind of explain the process, explore that process, look at responses, and then get the learners working in groups for their specialism to maybe do something like complete a risk matrix based on risks just within the specialism. So they're contextualizing when they're in the groups, but your delivery is more generic to all specialisms. And then finally, as part of the mapping, make sure you explore your knowledge and skills and look for opportunities to group them together into teaching sessions. Now, I know I've spoken to some colleges that have already started doing this, where they're going through all the knowledge, all the skills, and looking at how some of them might link together. So how we could create a teaching session that pulls together 2 or 3 knowledge and skills from different aspects of the specifications. And really, that's what T-levels were developed for. You know, they were developed with the intention that we'd be using this holistic style delivery rather than it being a unitized delivery. And that was purely for this reason, just for them, so that they could map the knowledge and skills and combine everything together. And the key thing is there's no set approach here. You know, it's what works best for you, the teaching staff you've got, the specialisms they're delivering, your students, and also the teaching environment and room availability. So by mapping it out, it helps you to kind of structure it best to suit your needs. Thanks, David. We're now just going to look at a few teaching and learning strategies, but again, I'll just check with David just in case any questions have come through.
Cheers, thanks, David. Again, no questions at the minute. I hope that means everyone's happy with what's being said so far. But as I said, if not, please put those questions in. We want to make sure that you are supported. So as David mentioned, we are going to look at some teaching and learning strategies. But first, I'd like to sort of get your ideas. We've gone through the performance outcomes. There's even some of the content, how that can be mapped and so on. And what I'd like to know, I want to give you the chance to share your own teaching and learning strategies for the occupational specialism. And even as well, if you can think back to what the last year has been like, because you might have some hints or lessons learned from year 1 as well. Now, I've put the link to the Jamboard directly into the chat. You should be able to see that and click directly on that. Should take you to this page here. We do have someone on here already. So if you just go over here to the side, click sticky note, and add your teaching and learning strategy, whatever it might be. Just close that one away and pop it into whichever box is relevant for you. So I'll give you about 10 minutes or so on this, depending on how we go. I'll get rid of this note. But I'd say a maximum of 10 minutes. And during this time, if there's any questions, please do pop them into that question box. And please do continue to add ideas. Just have a look at what's been put on here. So we have data technician, try to encourage learners to bring in relevant examples from their industry placement. Excellent. I know what some providers are doing is looking at the skills content in the occupational specialism and using that almost to create objectives for the students while they're on placement, like which skills they've either observed or actually taken part in. And so if you're doing that with your industry placement, they could bring that in, bring those ideas and share them with everyone, certainly the bits that they have seen. So some mention about Cambridge Analytica research project. Oh, of course, they big data there, bringing in to talk about legislation and regulations too. So people from different roles in colleges talking to students. So the IT team, excellent. Could even get them maybe to would be able to shadow some of the IT team, see what sort of support it is they often end up getting. I wonder as well. Sharing the experiences and challenges, targeted questions and answers, group work, practical tasks, discussions and debates, all excellent. Then contextualized teaching using real world examples there for digital infrastructure. Getting students to create their own knowledge questions, absolutely. It has much research has shown student generated questions have a positive impact on their achievements and their attainment. Ranging guest speakers, absolutely, be all great experience too. And that dashboard is still, or excuse me, that Jamboard is still going to be open in the background. But for now, going to just hand back over to David Seddon. And as I said, I can look at that Jamboard again at the end. Just going to talk through a few other teaching and learning strategies with you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure everybody will agree. One of the key teaching strategies is collaboration. You know, it embeds that culture that we're working together all towards the same goal, helps build relationships, respect and trust. It does take a long time to develop, and, you know, building student strengths increases team working skills. If we do that, we can help identify strengths and weaknesses, and we can use that then to help build more supportive teams, you know, setting clear roles and responsibilities with the teams of students. You know, there's loads of techniques that we can use, and it helps build that culture that, you know, students can support the peers and work with the peers towards the same goal, sharing all their experiences and at the same time advancing the skills through it. And I'm sure there's loads of different ways in which everybody already uses group work in the classroom. So I just wanted to use one simple example that we've got on the board. You know, you could place your students into groups and give each group a group leader. Each team's then provided with a picture, and there's a question then placed around it. So same as the example on the board. Every group could have the same picture, or they could all have the same question, but each with a different picture, so they're approaching it from a different context. And give the teams about 10 minutes to write down as many responses to the question as they can possibly think of. And then after that, stop them writing down and give them the groups another 10 minutes where they can discuss them. And as they're discussing it, the group leader can then organise all the responses into like clusters or themes or topics, whichever way they want to categorise it. And it's easiest to do this if you're using like post-it notes on a large sheet of paper. And then you can get the groups to feed it back, and they can then feed back what themes they've found, what clusters they've found, and how they've approached it. You know, and if you don't want to use post-it notes, use something like Padlet online, because if you're using something like Padlet or Jamboard, as we've just used, you're creating something that can be saved and then shared with the group as a revision source, a revision resource later. You know, it's great to get students in the habit of expanding on topics. You know, we saw it was good for when they did completed exam questions in year one, but even for where they're working on projects, or even when they go out into the workplace, you know, there's going to be times that they've got to be able to explore things in more depth and justify what the decision is. So this technique will allow you to ask why. You know, why have they identified something? Why is it important? What's the impact? So it's always like digging deeper. One of the other challenges I think we face, and I think it's from being in the digital background, is terminology. So some of the techniques, you know, we know how long it takes us to get learners into a room and settle down for a session. And then you might start delivering it just to have another learner turn up a few minutes late, and you're straight away caught out by recapping. If terminology is so important and it's a habit of getting them to know this, why not use something like free resources available, things like crosswords or word searches, and as the students enter the room, hand out a word search or a crossword and use the first 10 minutes of the session for them to kind of sit down and get stuck straight into that. There's no chance for them to get distracted or start talking. At the same time, you're reinforcing that terminology inside as they're going through it all. And you can even base this on things that you're going to cover in that session. And then as they're going through the session, get to highlight the key words as you've discussed it. So by the end of the session, they can see everything's been covered that you've included in the word search. Or even after delivering a new topic, set a 1-minute challenge with the students, get the learners to write down as much as they can about a particular topic using as many of the keywords that you've used today. So if they've done a word search, you can get them to write down as much as they can think about using as many of the keywords that you give them in that word search. And again, you could use Padlet or Jamboard for that and get the learners to access and do it on there. And that way, they've got a resource that they can tap into later. Or if you don't want to use Padlet, get them to use Post-it notes, stick them up on the board when they've finished, and then they can always take a photo and they've got something to refer back to. Or finally, as learners are leaving a session, get them to write a question on a Post-it note and stick it on the wall on the way out. You could ask them to write something about something they've enjoyed about the session, something new they've learned, something they want to recap, or something they struggled with. You know, learners might not want to say directly things that they've struggled with, but if it's anonymously, you might get more responses that way and gives you a chance to kind of get your focus going with this on the following session. We all know questioning is probably one of the easiest and most effective ways of assessing understanding. But it's also easy for the same students to always answer or get caught in a trap where you end up with closed questions, so your students aren't exploring anything in depth. One of the techniques we've used on the board is preparing a scavenger hunt, because it allows you to think about the questions you want to ask and what you want to gain from the session before you start students on it. And you could do this individually, or you could do it as a small group-based task. You can start out, give a sheet of questions out. Again, you know, focus on one topic. So you could be having it as a revision session, or it could just be a recap of something you've done. It should be quite complex, something that really requires the students to kind of go out, research, and give you a detailed answer, not simple yes/no questions. You could base it around a scenario, because if you're building it around a scenario, it's getting them used to the things that they'll encounter in things like the ESP or the synoptic projects. And then to make sure they don't get distracted, provide them with maybe website links, links to videos, links to online resources, or if you want to get students moving around, even chapters or pages in a library book, so you're getting them around and going, you're directing exactly where they need to go to. It keeps them more focused, and it allows you to direct them where they're going. And you can even give the students tokens at the start of the session, and the students could then use the tokens to buy hints from you if they're struggling. You know, a small prize at the end based on whoever finishes the scavenger hunt first with the most tokens left. You know, and like we said, keep all the questions open-ended, as you'll find that's one of the best skills you can prepare students for, especially where you come into the projects. And at the end of sessions, you know, pull it back to a discussion so that you're gauging what the students' understanding is and what they gain from the task, and if they gain from the task, what you wanted them to gain from it. Finally, for me, you know, look at the skills that we need learners to gain and break them down into sub-skills. And I know this might sound obvious, but by breaking these down, you can focus on smaller skills first and then get the learners to start combining these as confidence grows. You know, for example, if we think about the skills needed for network support, you know, you've got your customer service skills such as written skills, reading, listening, speaking skills. You've got your computer fundamentals, you know, knowing about the OS, how computers work, how to build a computer, installing software, drivers, upgrading systems, user applications. You know, there's loads, and we don't learn all these together. We build them up and we find out where we're weak in an area. And then once we've found where the weaknesses are, we focus on developing that. So again, if you can take what you want the students to achieve and kind of break them into sub skills, so that it's giving you to identify individual strengths and weaknesses. It helps when you're pairing students up for group work because you can pair strengths and weaknesses together. And it's ideal for personalised learning and differentiation. And it allows you then to focus on using the scavenger hunt later to kind of pull all the skills together into a bigger kind of activity. Thanks, David.
Thank you, David. That was great. Thank you for all those suggestions. We don't see any questions still. Remember, do pop them in because the final section that we're going to look at now is the resources and support that we actually have available to you with your Year 2 delivery. So I'm going to talk through the resources that are available and in development from NCFE and what some other organizations are doing too. So our content team have developed and made available some example schemes of work for the occupational specialisms. And for some of the occupational specialisms, they have developed some teaching resources to help with that. And they are still continuing to develop those teaching resources as well in the background. And these teaching resources come as essential resources, and those ones are free. So our essential resources completely free, and then we also have additional resources which are also available, but there is a cost for those ones. But the resources will contain, as you may have already downloaded similar resources for Year 1, there's an e-learning resource or presentation, activity sheets, home study sheets, and session plans to accompany those resources as well. And aside from our resources, HUDR are releasing a textbook for the core content of the digital T-level, and this is due to be released towards the end of August. And as I did mention earlier, we do have some sample occupational specialism assignments with mark schemes and guides, but there's also that exemplification material, which you may find very useful, showing pass and distinction standards of work. You could even get students to look at a pass and distinction standard and highlight what are the improvements as another sort of teaching and learning strategy. So be able to break down a model answer. And we have also got different training webinars such as this on our T-level provider support page. As well as that, all of our previous webinars are recorded. We do have a YouTube playlist where you'll be able to view any of these. So this slide provides information regarding some of the key contacts, and our customer support team are often the first line of inquiry if it's to do with the portal, registering students, etc. As for me, I'm your contact for support related to teaching and learning, CPD sessions, things like that. And we also have our account managers and these support centers with the business of delivering T-levels. And I must say that providers do find that having that singular point of contact very valuable as well. And so I just want to finish off really now with one final poll with the same question I asked you actually at the beginning, which was what your confidence is like. So I'm gonna launch that poll now, and hopefully you can all see that on screen. And while you're just putting in your votes, remember in the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel are the slides that we've actually used today. So please do grab them, download them, save them. And if you have any questions, you have my email address as well. And if you may already have had curriculum consultations with a member of the provider development team, they can be booked through your account exec. So I would be more than willing to arrange your next curriculum consultations as well. Undoubtedly, most of you would probably be having that curriculum consultation with me. But certainly it looks like some people's confidence has gone up. We still have a few people in, no one below the 5 to 6 range at least, majority in the 7 to 8 range, and a few people in 9 to 10. Excellent. Those people in 9 to 10, excellent. I'm glad you've gained quite a bit from this. Or as I said, do email us or get in contact or put any questions right now into the question box, as there are about 2 more minutes remaining. If you are leaving now though, please feel free to do so. A little evaluation will pop up. It's just 5 questions, all multiple choice. There's also a box where you can add in your own questions, comments, ideas for CPD, training, etc. that you would like. So that feedback is valuable to us. David Seddon as well, I'd also like to thank you for all your work on this as well today. And if you are leaving us now, then from everyone here at NCFE, we would like to wish you an enjoyable and successful year.